Hi, Hawa.
Hi, Lubna. How are you?
Great, great.
Good, good. Happy International Women's Day.
Yeah, to you too.
Yeah. Which is a wonderful day, but definitely something that made us want to talk about something related to women. And I think we initially were thinking maybe womanhood, but I think something that's, I wouldn't say ignored, but isn't as talked about to this sort of extent when it comes to feminist issues is girls, right? Sort of girlhood, the experiences of girls, the pressures of girls. And I really wanted to sort of, or we wanted to sort of center girls in this discussion as we celebrate International Women's Day and the whole month being in honor of women throughout the month of March. So with that being said, we wanted to go back to our new format, which is myth busting. And so we're going to just talk about a number of myths that are common when it comes to girls and dispelling that and busting it with all of you. Given what's happening in the world, what's always happening, I really think it's important to talk about violence and sort of the gender-based violence that people often talk about and how that impacts girls. And it's often sort of implied, particularly when it's sexual based violence, that it's the woman's fault. And the reason why the girl did it, I should say, is because they wore something provocative. And this is equally applicable to women, but I think girls suffer from this really disturbing assumption and myth that is completely false. And even if they quote unquote are wearing something provocative, and this is a common myth, like this is still something, despite all the conversation, especially in the US, despite all the knowledge and information that we have when it comes to gender-based violence towards girls, when it comes to rape, girls being assaulted in any capacity in a relationship by strangers, the number one argument always is, well, where was she, right? Was it late at night? What is she wearing?
Right.
All these types of justifications
Yeah.
to not hold boys and men accountable. And that's a common myth. And that is just absolutely not true. Also, a lot of sexual based violence happens in the home, right? It is often by relatives, it is by often someone within the community, irrespective of what that young girl is wearing. I think that's another thing that we aren't willing to talk about, particularly again connected to the Epstein files. And so this myth is an excuse for to not hold men accountable for their actions and boys. And the problem with that too is when you don't hold these young boys accountable early, they are most certainly going to continue to do that well into adulthood. So the violence against women and children just continue as a cycle. And when you remove it out of the United States context, right?
Yeah.
Um, think about the girls who wear the hijab, right? In Muslim worlds are very conservative. You have
Right.
violence in Mormon communities, right? Fundamentalist Mormon communities, Amish communities, very religious, Orthodox Jews. There was a documentary I watched once about some of the violence that the young girls being married off and the violence, and they all dress modestly, quote unquote. So the evidence just isn't there yet. We continue to push forth this myth.
Yeah. And data 100% supports that because we know that 60% of women who are killed by family members or their partners. So if it's her clothing or the way she's dressed or where she is, then how does that make sense if 60% of them are being killed by a relative or a partner versus men? In male homicide rate, only 11% of them are killed by partners, female partners, or female relatives.
Mhm.
So that just shows that that myth is absolutely incorrect, um, because they are disproportionately, again, women and girls are being uh, killed by people who know them. So they've seen them dressed in all types of things.
Yeah.
So this makes no sense at all that that's even a myth. You mentioned how boys need to be held accountable. We have to teach them to understand that their actions matter. And then
Mhm.
if they don't get it, then we have to have the accountability mechanisms in society to step in and make them suffer the consequences, you
Yeah.
know, varying degrees depending on the offense. So that's from the boys' perspective. But ultimately, I would even argue that girls have to learn how to protect themselves because
Yeah.
there's no one out there to protect them, really. Because a lot of this violence is normalized, even as you mentioned, in some of these communities, more so than others.
Yeah.
Because there is the moral foundation, the cultural foundation, the ideology that enables and cultivates misogyny and chauvinistic behavior. So it becomes more of a fertile ground for that type of abuse. So it's just teaching these girls to spot the red flags.
Yeah.
And
No,
rem
oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I wanted to respond to that because one example I remember years ago, I think this was maybe 10 years ago, BBC did a show, or they had done an investigative report on the high level of sexual and physical harassment towards girls and women in Cairo, in Egypt.
Mm,
And one thing they were not investigating, but they were reporting on this group or this organization that teaches karate. So it's sort of self-defense. They accepted that this is just the nature of being a woman and a girl in Egypt. In order to survive the streets, you have to protect yourself. Like it was so fascinating to see that in that society where they're like, we have to protect our girls because we're not always going to be here. We can't always be with them.
yeah,
And so it was just reporting on this studio that had built up this sort of karate martial arts self-defense classes for girls and women, but the emphasis was on the girls. So it goes to your point of where I think we should be doing that. And thankfully, there are sort of people waking up to this reality. You know, like usually people just complain, complain, complain. And I'm in agreement with you. At the end of the day, it is what it is. This is the environment that we live in a patriarchal world. You know, you are at risk in many societies and communities, one of which is your family, right? Your family can be your worst enemy. And but it's harder than a part of me is just like, well, then how do girls in families protect them? You know, like if people
yeah,
hush hush, how do we educate girls to protect themselves if we know that the biggest perpetrator is most likely someone in your family, you know?
right.
I don't know.
I mean,
That's
I
just an
think,
open-ended question, you know, for
yeah. No, it's a good question because I think it would, in that case, it would depend on the country because there are some countries out there that have established institutions that are particularly concerned with this issue or typical just law enforcement. But also even in these cases, I would argue sometimes, and data has shown us as well, that law enforcement do not take these complaints seriously when
yeah.
they're in that early stage. It's only when it's too late, when the girl has been raped or killed, that oops, they start paying attention. We would like to move to myth number two, which is about the gap in education. So basically, there is this myth that girls are always more disadvantaged than boys in education. And, educational attainment data across countries have shown us actually the opposite, that there is now a gender gap, but they call it the reverse gender gap, specifically in higher ed.
Yeah.
Um, that there are more girls and more women who are attaining higher educational levels than and qualifications than men. But now we go to the but. The
Yeah.
disturbing fact is that this does not translate to real economic or financial or decision-making power. Because as I mentioned, in top managerial positions across the world, women represent only 30%. And women continue to make 60 cents for every dollar that men make. So if we are being trained more, better, longer than men, why are we getting less money? Why are we not in top decision-making positions in business where arguably we've been trained to actually do that job? And people say, oh, it's different cultures. No, not really. Even in Europe, where, it's hailed as one of these most progressive nations and regions in terms of gender equality, women women have to work 15 months on average to make exactly the same amount of money that a man makes when he works 12 months. So I don't understand. I really don't know where we need to look for inspiration at this point. I'm sure there are really bright, maybe Nordic countries,
Yeah.
but they're always doing it better than everyone
I think
else.
the Nordic models are very, like to the point where I believe that they're also saying that they're so interested in being equitable and putting policies around it that even when it comes to maternity leave, they provide pretty like sizable paternity leave for the fathers. I think it's almost equal, like at parity. And obviously the mothers need more time, obviously just by the fact that the child is more in need of the mother. Just even let's speak from like a nutrition perspective, right? If you're breastfeeding or anything like that, or just in general, the child is first 2 years, I believe the child is very more dependent on the primary caregiver, which is often the mother. But I just think the fact that they want to make it, that they are adamant about how do we be fair, is beautiful in a way that I just don't think anywhere else in the world is willing to do or commit to right now. And also to your point about, yeah, like most women are very well educated around the world. And I remember reading another article in Pakistan where I think there are actually like more medical students that are women than are men. But as soon as they get married, they stop practicing or they never really practice to begin with. The article is basically saying, if why are we encouraging young women to go to medical school if we know that the majority of them are just going to opt out of practice because they need to get married, right? Because ultimately, and I could be wrong, the idea was that it was like a social status thing. Like it helps, oh, my daughter's educated. It makes you more of a catch in the marital market. But what, so it's still like, does that make sense? Like it's still just,
Yeah, but like the med school for
yeah,
social
well, because
status,
it's like
like
you're
that's a
so, because
very,
that's like a, it's weird, but I guess it's just the idea, and
yeah,
I'll find the article and include it in this
no, yeah,
episode. But it was just interesting to me because yeah, it's medical school is not by any stretch of the imagination easy. And also, but it is such a social status, I think, within Pakistani society to be a doctor. Like, wow, look, my daughter's a
right,
doctor, my son
right,
is a doctor. It's very high level. So again, it just speaks to just social class, dynamics and desires and status. But again, and also I think it's like not okay for them to practice, right? It's like, oh, no, 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 you just go be a wife, right? So it's almost like you're giving false sense of hope. Like, why waste all these young girls' time? You know how heartbreaking it is. I think about that. You're told, go
yeah,
get an education, do this, and then all the jobs and all the well-paying jobs, particularly I'm thinking of like the global south,
right.
just go give it to your brothers, go give it to your sons, and go be dependent on your husband.
Who are half as qualified,
Literally,
often,
clearly, yeah. And I think that was even in the
yeah,
case in Pakistan with the like the medical schools, the majority of the women who got in based on exams, or the majority of people who got in based on exam results were women. So it's just like, if
yeah,
they're the best of the, what are we doing? You know? And I wonder how many of those girls wanted to be doctors, you know?
yeah.
I don't think all of them are like, let me go through 6, 7 years of medical school to not practice anymore. I don't buy that.
Does the article talk about domestic work and whether that's part of the reason why they're pulled away from being practicing as doctors?
Oh no, I don't remember. I don't recall.
Okay.
So I'll
Because
just get
yeah,
the report back.
because we know also that's across different countries and cultures that domestic work continues to be disproportionately done by women. So women do almost 10x of that relative to men, specifically in a marriage setting.
Yeah.
And that apparently some economists, very ambitious, calculated that, and that's equal to about $10 trillion a year. And that's so just to give comparison, this is more than the entire tech industry. So that's how much economic value women in their domestic work they generate for the economy. But this is unpaid. So now we run into the issue of the disproportionate financial well-being of women relative to men in the long term when you are creating all this value doing work, but you're not being paid for it. So we know also that women are disproportionately poor or poorer relative to men.
Yeah.
They suffer from poorer health relative to men. Like all the statistics across any well-being metric, women do they do worse than men.
And I think what's important too is why I'm glad we're doing this episode is obviously we're talking about women, but I think I want girls to watch this so they understand this, to be aware and cognizant of these statistics, to figure out ways in which they could potentially mitigate these things, like how do you find a partner that is willing to be equitable when it comes to housework, right? Like, or as close to housework as possible. How do you find someone who supports your career ambitions or your entrepreneurial ambitions? Like, so I think with that, I think I want to connect, since we've been speaking about marriage, I think the next myth I'd like us to talk about is about child marriage.
Mm,
And this myth says that child marriage is a dying practice from the past. And that is absolutely not true. And why I included this myth is because there's this assumption that this is something that happens in Africa or the Middle East or Asia, right? Afghanistan, people say these things, or Iraq or whatever. And child marriage is very much legal, like it is absolutely a possibility and continues to happen in the United States, particularly within Christian fundamentalist communities, diasporic communities for sure. I have no doubt that there are Muslim families that encourage child marriage that we are not familiar with, Orthodox Jews. I know in a number of states in the United States, you can get married as young as 16 or 15 with the permission of your parents.
right.
So this is a very universal issue. So it is very easy to sort of
Yeah.
dismiss this as, oh, those Muslims, those brown and black people over there do that. Absolutely not. We know from all of the news stories that come out, particularly again, as I said, from the Christian, when I think of Christian fundamentalists, I'm kind of talking about fundamentalist Mormons. There have been a number of cases where one particular leader, I don't know if his name was Warren Jebb, he's in jail now in Texas, but he had this community where he had multiple wives that were 12, 13, 14, very, very young.
Wow.
No different than the stories you hear about in Afghanistan, okay? So, and Orthodox Jewish communities too. Sometimes it is both children are getting married, right? It's not the majority of the time, it's an older adult male with a young girl. But in often cases in these religious communities, it's, two 16-year-olds, two 17-year-olds, two 15-year-olds getting married. And so I think this is just absolutely not true. And I think for me, why I'm adamant about bringing this up as someone who is in the United States is that this is both an east and west, north and south,
Mm,
whatever you want to call issue. It is not, and it
yeah.
is something that we need to continue to dismantle as an institution wherever you are, particularly because girls are the biggest victims of it, right? Let's just be real. And I'm still like traumatized. I don't know if it was Yemen or Afghanistan, but it was this story, I think, in National Geographic many years ago that was of these like 9-year-old girls getting married to these like 40, 50-year-old men. And just that was when I was like, I actually do think I hate men. Those are the moments where I'm like, I actually fucking hate men. Like every time I try to not go back to my old self, I read shit like that and like absolutely kill him. Just kill him. Like, but yeah, I think this just shows is unfortunately another example of where girls are very much, um, and that's a commodity type situation, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
just keep it like very much 100 about that. Like there is an element of, being able to have one less, kid to feed or to fulfill
Yeah.
some weirdo cult leader's fantasies, and then you get to go to heaven. Like this is what I mean when I say that children, Lubna and I are very much in belief of that children are the biggest sort of we do not respect or honor children's rights or autonomy. We don't see them. We see them as an extension of their parents or whatever, but that they are not their own individual beings that need to be respected just like adults do. And yeah, this is a myth that is just completely
Yeah.
bullshit in any part of the planet that you live in.
Yeah. And on that note, actually, I would say also like regions where they're experiencing war or displacement,
Yeah.
particularly to violence, externally imposed or internally imposed, Ukraine, Iraq, Syria. We've seen in parts of Africa, Sudan now with the famine, and also Somalia, I think in the past in the 90s, but
Yeah.
there is a spike in child marriages because it's seen as protecting the girl from a worse situation where she could be, kidnapped or raped or
Yeah.
so, you marry her off to a well-to-do, relatively speaking, man who will protect her or take care of her. And there's a documentary, we'll share the link to that as well, about the increase in child marriages in Iraq after the
Yeah.
invasion. And that's a very, very sad documentary. It highlights how a lot of the people in the religious establishment there, they act as middlemen in connecting the girls to the to the men, and they take a commission on that. It's like a business transaction. So and just on that note, also I people think of married women in these contexts would have more protection, arguably, but that's again arguable because we've seen how violence is often committed in the household. But also, if we're looking at health data and health and well-being, and we know that many of these women, actually more, almost half, 50% of them, do not have decision-making power over their health and their well-being and specifically their sexual and reproductive health. So their husbands make the decisions for them, over 50%. And that's again across the globe. Contextualized in some of these countries, but if you look at global data, as according to UN Women in a 2025 report, this is across the world. That brings me to the conversation about, or the mere practice, the shocking practice to me, that children take the father's last name. It's almost, again, yeah, let's talk about that. It's like it comes across as, or it is, that women are vessels to create that life. Their bodies are vessels to create that life. Once that life is created, it's passed on to carry the legacy of someone else that contributed. Certainly they did. 50% of the DNA, and what, 2 minutes in the reproductive process itself, if we stretch it. So that's their contribution, and then our contribution and the building of that product is 9 months. We could die in the delivery process, and then we are invisible. We're rendered invisible thereafter. Your name is not, it's like you create a product and your brand should not be, this is a crazy analogy, but I love it. Your brand should not be stamped on the product whatsoever. Isn't that crazy? Tell a businessman today, invest 9 months of your life building this thing, your time, your energy, day and night. You could die when you build this product, and then ultimately we can't have your signature on it whatsoever. You don't take any credit.
No,
Maybe men will understand this analogy. I don't know. It's a crass analogy, but I can't think of anything better. And I'm not saying all women are creating life so willingly and lovingly. Some women are fucking nasty.
Yeah.
They're pregnant, they're awful, they hate it, they don't want the child. I'm not saying they're angels, all of them, but I'm saying ultimately what happens is that the body of the female is channeling energy and resources from sustaining this body to creating this new life. So that's a project. That's a productive work that the male body is not doing and cannot do. So why are we rendered invisible in this process thereafter? I don't get it. I really don't get it. I mean, maybe I should
never
read
understood
more.
it. And it's and no one has given me an argument. No one has given me a valid argument to justify, right, why the father gets all the credit in terms of the child's name. Because that's erasure. There is erasure in that.
There is.
Right?
There is.
And even in the Islamic tradition, I get shit when I bring up these, but it's I'll shut up when you give me a valid argument, and yet you cannot give it to me. And also, what legacy are men giving? Why are men acting like they're all Alexander the Great? I have a legacy. Fuck you. You don't have a fucking get over yourself. Am I wrong? They're like, oh, I have to give my child. Fuck you. You know what I'm saying? Even the people are I want to give my name to my son. I'm like, you want to give your name to your son. I think you're cursing your son by doing that, because you suck. You've not accomplished anything. You're not interesting enough. And that's fine. I'm not sitting here saying, I'm just saying that if you decide to produce a child with someone, both of you should be involved in, at the very least. I think it should be the reverse. But I'll be nice and I'll be generous, and I will say that at the very least, because I think that child has a right to know its genealogy from both the father and the mother. And so you need to include both last names. I think a lot of Latin American countries do that in
Right.
Spain. Like, I agree with that. And I don't think that's like, how is that blasphemy? Oh, and then you could talk about property right, all this bullshit. Well, I'm sorry, in the Islamic tradition, I get less. So I still, I don't get my mother's name. I don't get as much when I'm
So
thinking of
why would it even
inheritance. When
matter
I'm
at
thinking of
that
an
point,
inheritance.
right? Like
What?
if the inheritance laws already gives you less, so you might as well get the mother's name.
At
Like
least
it
give me
doesn't,
that. My mother raised me. And how many men are raising, really? That's
yeah.
another thing. Like, how many of these guys are raising the kid? Like, now I'm getting upset because it's true. It's like,
I'm sorry.
no, don't. I always get heated. I always get passionate. But like, if you really break it down, it's like he gets the last name. The mother carries the child for 9 months. Exactly as you said, you could die. It changes your body. The child is, think about the women who don't even have money to formula. They have to breastfeed for 2, 3 years. That's hard on the body. It's not easy. Then you have to
Yeah.
do all these things. And that kid's attached to you in the hip. Listen, at the end of the day, we've talked about this, the kids don't really give a shit about the dad until, like they need the mom. They really, there is, and the mom needs the child, right?
Yeah.
And all of this, that's work. That's so much work, you know? And then he's doing what? What's he doing, the father? And you get the last name? Tell me that's not the biggest trick that they got us, Lubna.
Yeah, I don't get it. I need to read
It's
about
a
this, Hawa. Really, this is on my to-do list because I need to understand when did that start? Why? Yes, I've heard arguments about inheritance and distribution of resources because it tends to be concentrated in the hands of men. So they want to know how they want to trace it to the right lineage. So it's through other men's name. So that's what it is. And a lot of times I've heard that explanation. Also, I've heard, but it doesn't make sense. The second argument in the context of marriage, children that come within marriage, because the argument that I heard is that because women can sleep around and produce all these children, so being able to trace children to the correct father is the best way is to give the father's name. Um, but that even doesn't make a lot of sense. However, if we buy that
let
argument, doesn't
them
even
let the girl sleep around, and who gives a shit? I'm kidding.
it doesn't make sense in the
Yeah, what
context
the
of
fuck?
marriage because she's supposed to be
Yeah,
monogamous and sleeping with
yeah.
this only one man.
That's a good point,
So
though. That's such a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Is like, why are they making that argument if she's married? Like, she's
she's
not going to
married.
cheat
Yeah.
like the man is. Let's call a spade anyway. In those times, it was not, those women weren't doing that, right? I wish they were. Shit. Fuck these dudes.
I love how we started
Happy
this
Women's
episode.
Month.
Yeah,
Happy
yeah,
International Women. Cheat.
you were
Cheat, ladies.
you you were like, I'm so zen. And here we are, we
I'm
were back to
failing
ground
every
zero.
day. I'm just like, I read these statistics and I'm like, fucking, I swear to God. Like,
Exactly. Maybe I should not have read these statistics in preparation for this episode, honestly, because how can you not get frustrated, disappointed, disenchanted with this whole arrangement? You're like, we keep on doing a lot of work because we're working on two fronts, the domestic front, the public front. And I'm not assuming that all women do that. I know a lot of women do not choose marriage, a lot of women do not choose children. So maybe the domestic front is not as demanding. But I'm saying for a big portion of the women population, women choose those ways of life. And in those two ways of life, children and marriage, domestic labor continues to be disproportionately done by women, and it is unpaid. But it's not the problem. That's not the problem. In my opinion, the problem is that nothing is guaranteed in life. Even if you have an amazing partner, very supportive, all things are great, he might pass away, right? He might cheat on you. You might, guys, divorce. Then what happens if he is the sole breadwinner for the longest time,
yeah.
happy family, you're doing domestic, he's doing all the professional outside external work, and all of a sudden, you're left to support this family. Often the women are left with the kids, specifically in the case of death, unfortunate death, then or unpredicted death, then now she has to support this household with no years of work experience under her belt. And what? Like, what's the plan now? So that's, I think, where the issue is for me.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to be a trad wife and do their thing on a farm or like raise chickens, I don't know what these influencers are do it. If it makes you happy, sure. But if he divorces you, or if he cheats on you, or, God forbid, but if, like, he passes away, you're gonna come to us crying if
Yeah.
there isn't enough wealth that is built under your name. So, and even these influencers, a lot of them are full of shit because they have their own businesses.
They
That's
have
a business.
businesses. I think, and
That's
I,
a business. Like them influencing and talking about being
yeah,
a trad wife. You're generating money for yourself. That's woman independence.
I
That
think it's
a true
yeah,
traditional wife would not do that. A true
no.
traditional wife would not have a bank account in her name, a business for her, and generating all that money from her followers. So
Yeah.
they are a contradiction.
Yeah. No, they're hypocrites, I think. And I think that's another important thing for girls to remember is to be careful who you're influenced by, right? I think there's so much messaging that young girls get on the internet of what type of women to person, what type of sort of partner you want to attract. And I think it's very important for girls to listen to themselves, to trust their inner sort of voice more than anyone else. I'm a huge advocate and belief of I just want women to do whatever they want, but I also want them to be very smart about whatever they want. And always just have like a plan B. That's
Yeah.
always say, have a plan B, ladies. Do whatever you want, but you got to have a plan B. Be very careful with the information that you consume because so much content, you got to get the girls young. And this
Yeah.
connect, you got to get them young so you can, once they get money as women, you can start selling as many things as you want, particularly when it comes to beauty. So I think our last myth that we'd like to touch upon is around beauty and beauty standards. And one of which that is really interesting to me is the myth that body positivity has fixed the thinness obsession.
Mm.
So I guess this is more Euro US centric, but there have been in the last sort of 10 plus years this sort of ushering in of sort of respecting different types of bodies, ethnicities. It's not even limited to body type, but ethnicities, gender, however you want to call it. And so I do think body positivity came from a really great place because as someone who grew up in the 90s and in the 2000s, all the imagery and all the content that I ever saw coming out of advertising and movies was like super, super, super skinny, right? Super, super skinny and super, super white.
Right.
So I think body positivity came from a place of like, there are so many different types of bodies that we should embrace, which as someone
Right.
who's never been super duper skinny, never will be, and was great, you know. And we could argue that they have gone to certain extremes here and there, but for the majority, if we look at it from sort of a balanced perspective, it had good intentions. And you've seen that play out as someone who's a marketer, you've seen those changes play out within media and marketing. You know,
Mm.
I have seen a shift in even mannequins you see in stores of like different sizes. There's been an extension of sizes that are made available from certain brands, even at the high end level. You're seeing on luxury fashion brands when they do fashion shows, they do have women of different body types. So, in many ways, it's been great, but it absolutely has not fixed the thinness
Mm.
issues that are really pressured onto young girls, women in general. But again, it starts young, right? You got to get them young so you can start having them buy shit when they get older to, you know, fix this problem that they never had to begin with. And you're seeing the rise of GLPs, which are weight loss pills like Ozempic, Monjaro, I think is a big one. And so, and the top, even though you're seeing these different types of models, the highest paying models are skinny, sick, you know, like they are thin. There is still a desire by these brands. They're sort of willing to sort of fulfill whatever sort of complaints they're receiving by being a bit more inclusive. But really, when it comes down to it, they're brand ambassadors, they're top models, the highest paid models, they're all super skinny and generally very white. And so it isn't as inclusive from an economic standpoint, right? And I think that's something that is really unfortunate for me because as much as we're giving these young girls this messaging of body positivity, they're not seeing it play out
Mm.
in media, which has the influence and power over them. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Lubna, with that.
I was just thinking maybe specifically in the American context where we know it's ranked about in the top three countries in the world in terms of obesity.
Yeah.
And the food in the US is not healthy, generally speaking, a lot of preservatives, access to organic, healthy, natural foods remains to be the exception to the rule. Many communities and neighborhoods and cosmopolitan centers and big cities struggle actually to have affordable access to that type of food in in a first world country, right? And I'm against that term and that terminology, but let's use it for a second. So it's shocking to hear that, but that's the case. So I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you, if part of the reason that the thinness archetype is still dominant in the beauty standards within the American context, at least, because it feeds a lot of the social media and the Hollywood, and it's a huge machine for the production of culture and soft power around the world. So it has influenced the US. So I'm wondering whether this thin archetype is still dominant because nowadays it represents almost a resistance to this, culture of processed, preserved food, fast
Excessiveness.
food,
Yeah.
excessiveness, abundance that is associated in many worldviews with like laziness and
Mm.
inactivity, lack of strong will and perseverance and all these negative associations. And the last point that I'm thinking about as we're talking is about the racial element of it. Because
Yeah.
obviously some races and some ethnicities and some peoples around the world, they have different body types by default, by built.
Mm.
So they tend to be fuller or taller or shorter or, because we're products of our physical environments for, centuries, like for our DNA and our bodies to be built to adapt to these environments. So by that archetype, the thin archetype speaks to a particular type of beauty standards for a particular type of people, the Eurocentric, and then that excludes because it's based on the racial dominance and racial superiority of that group. So that other body types are considered less attractive. So that continues to be the case, even if they feed into social media all these like positive images, the underlying um, racist thrust of the societal build remains to be there.
Another thing that we didn't mention, but I'll just connect it back to this myth, is sort of how young women are getting and um how, I'm sorry, let me repeat myself, how much younger girls and women are getting plastic surgery, extreme forms of
Yeah.
plastic surgery, like facelifts. When you and I were growing up, you got a facelift at like 55, 60. You weren't doing that.
Well,
You
absolutely,
were
yeah.
not doing that in your 30s. You weren't doing that, and now they're calling them like midlifts. There are all these
I
different types
didn't
of
know that
facelifts.
people do facelifts in their 30s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was a woman I saw on TikTok where she was our age and she got a facelift. And it's like, and everyone,
Oh,
and
well,
she
we're
looked,
almost 40.
yeah, we're almost 40, but she's 38 and she got a facelift. And I was like, what are you do, And to me,
Yeah.
it's more just we're so online and we're just so self-aware of how we look constantly and how we're just looking at people way too much, ourselves and others. And then there comes in that comparison. And if you live in a society that is telling you you can fix yourself, you can fix yourself since you're a child, and that messaging really being pushed out on girls, it's kind of inevitable that, people are going to be getting facelifts at the age that they're getting it now, and that they want to have this sort of like look, which is hilarious because if you're never going to change back the age. Like that's what I want people to you're never going to like be 25, even though, so if you got a facelift at 40, you're still fucking 40, babe. Like you might look better or whatever in your eyes, but your age is still your fucking age. Like it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, it's dark and we just need to let kids be kids, like just leave the girls alone. Let them be girls. I can't imagine being a girl today. I think it's so much worse than it was for us, Lubna. I really do.
No,
Like,
100%.
I just,
Tenfold.
it's just the pressure, the sort of media, like everything. There's just so much content, so much stuff. So, you have my heart, girls, and just again, really try to listen to your inner voice. It's never going to do you wrong. And know that you should always trust your intuition, protect yourself. You don't have to live in a life of constant fear. I'm not like trying to say that, but I think to be aware and to protect yourself and to make choices that you are confident in and you are secure in, and you're not being swayed by external entities or family or friends or anything like that. And that I
Yeah.
believe in you. But you,
Oh,
Lubna.
yeah. Oh, beautifully said. Beautifully said. Not much to add there, really, Hawa. The only thing is about how we are made of three different equally important parts, which is the mind, the body, and the soul. But
Mm,
ultimately, if someone asked me who we are the soul. And we repeatedly spoke in this podcast about the overemphasis in a very unhealthy way on the body.
yeah.
And both of us believe that this is by design because you can sell products to the body if you emphasize this illusion that it's imperfect, while it's so difficult to do that when you're talking about the soul.
Mm,
Um, it's less seen, it's less understood. And even with that, we see the rise of products and services about healing and elevating the soul and, you know, all of these kind of things that we're seeing out there in the market. But the emphasis is still on the body. And as you so beautifully said, I think it disadvantages girls more so than any other part of our society. Because it does hit hard in terms of the frequency, the negative messaging. Um, and I join you in urging them to listen to their inner voice, but I would add also try to understand your soul more so than your body. Anytime you try to think about your body, about your hair, new makeup to buy, a new purse to, buy, or any of these things, just try to replace that thought with something about your soul. So, what is it about your soul that you like? What is it that you want to build more, improve? What is it that you think is broken or is sad or is needs some attention? So try to talk with your soul more so than with your body. And I think by replacing that discourse and that conversation, we shift the focus to what will build more resilient, stronger girls, because they can't get them when the soul is getting stronger and they understand their soul better and they work with it, and try to understand the lessons they need to learn in this lifetime. So with that, Hawa, what
stay
do we
searching.
absolutely, and stay unscripted,
Unscripted.
everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Lubna.
Bye. Bye.
And that's a wrap on this week's Unscripted conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to Unscripted with Lubna and Hawa wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. We'll be back with a brand new one next Wednesday. Until then, keep it unfiltered, unapologetic, and unscripted.